All right, well, hey, good morning. For those of you who don't know, my name is Robbie Kubr. I'm the senior pastor here at Gateway, and I'm excited to be able to share with you this morning. We're going to jump into the Word here in just a little bit, but before I do, there's been some really exciting things going on with our building over the last couple of weeks, and you're really going to start to see it over the next week or so. And so I wanted to kind of give you an update on that. You know that we've been working on our building project. We're adding on a new wing to the building. It's going to be for Christian education and children's ministry, and it's going to be a great tool for us to reach into our community a little bit. But as you've seen it go up, it's as with buildings, when they go up, it seems like things happen kind of in spurts. Like things go up really quickly, and then you don't see a lot of change for a while. And so that's kind of been where we've been at, is that a lot happened. The building went up, we got the outside done, all that, and then if you've been paying attention over the last several weeks, you're like, where's it going? What's been going on? So I wanted to give you an update, because this week you're going to start to see some really big changes, and it's going to be really cool. Actually, some of it even already started this past week. So this past week, the wall in the office hallway that used to be an external wall, they blew that wall out, and so there's a big gaping hole there right now going into the new addition, and we're excited to get that space filled in. As we go throughout this week, some of the big things you're going to be seeing that's going to be really cool is that wall out there in the lobby they're going to poke through there and open up that space and connect it to the bigger part of the lobby that they'll be working on. We'll have a temporary wall up there for a while, but you'll start to see that this week. Also this week, you'll see some of the roofing begin to go on the front section of the building. It's been kind of bare there for a while. We've had parts of it torn off as they've been working, and so you'll see the new roof start to go on this week, and we'll also see some of the duct work in the new building begin to be put in this week. So lots and lots happening over the next couple weeks. So I'd encourage you, if you have time throughout the week, swing by, take a look at it, see what is going to be going on. It's so cool to see that, and I know that it's exciting to see when you see progress happening on the building, because we're so excited for this opportunity. We know that those facilities, look, it's just a building. Buildings are great, but they are just a building. And so we're looking forward to, though, not the building, but the lives that will be able to be touched through the use of that building. So we're excited for what God has been doing and is going to continue to do through that. So I wanted to let you know, give you that little update on the building, and keep your eyes peeled over the next couple of weeks for some of those big changes. It's going to be awesome. So let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll jump into the Word this morning. Father, we love you. We thank you so much for today, for the chance you've given us to gather together, to worship, to celebrate you together. God, I pray that as we dig into your Word now, that you would speak to each one of us, that you would show us, God, how we can relate to you in faith. We talked last week about our stories and how we can use that. And so, God, I just pray that you would continue to show us today how we can live for you and tell people about you, God. We love you. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. All right, and now if you're like me, you've probably experienced something like this. Like you've gone through something in life that you started a project or a new job or something, and as you got into it, you realized that it was maybe a little bit more than you bargained for. And at some point, you may have even reached a place where you said, you know what? I didn't sign up for this. I'm out. Like I don't want to be a part of this anymore. Like you thought it was going to be one thing, and then as you got into it, you realized this is not what I thought it was. This is way more work, or this is way harder, or this is just not something desirable for me. And you went, you know what? I didn't sign up for this. I'm out. Like maybe for you it was like a sneak attack. Like maybe there was a friend one time who contacted you and you hadn't been in touch with them for a while, and they're like, hey, yeah, let's get together and get lunch. And you're like, that'd be awesome. You know, I'd love to get together and catch up. And so you get together with them at the restaurant, and it's about 10 minutes in, you realize, oh, this is a pitch for a pyramid scheme. Like, okay, I wanted to see you, but I'm not signing up for this. Like, this is not what I thought this was going to be. And your attitude towards that conversation takes a bit of a shift. Or if you're a parent, I know you've experienced this. Every parent has like horror stories from when their kids were babies of like massive diaper blowouts. I'm not talking about dirty diapers. Dirty diapers are a thing. You got to deal with it. I'm talking about the big ones where it's like, how did you get it on your back? Like, how is it on your, all parents have those horror stories. And I don't know about you, but I know in our family, it seemed like I was the one that always got those. Like, you know it's bad when you have a hall of fame of diaper blowouts that you can go to, and you're like, I got story after story. I can tell you about the arcade explosion. I can tell you about the waterfall walk of shame. Like, you name it, I could tell you. And there's a point though that there's sometimes where like you get that baby and you survey the damage and you go, you know what? I did not sign up for this. This was not what I thought I was getting myself into when I was going to be a parent. And there's other points as well. Maybe you've had a job before where you worked in customer service, or you worked in retail, or you worked in the service industry, and you came to the realization that the customer is not always right. And you had an experience where maybe somebody like just was going off on you because they thought you were doing a terrible job, or their food wasn't right, or you were out of the thing that they wanted to buy, and they're telling you what a terrible place this is and what a terrible person you are and all this, and you're sitting there thinking they're trying to have a smile on your face thinking, I did not sign up for this. This is not part of the job description. Or maybe at a job you've actually gotten to the point where you actually walked out. That something happened. Maybe it was your boss. Maybe you had a boss that was mistreating you or just demanding too much of you, or maybe it was a coworker you had some kind of conflict with, and at some point it crossed a line and you said, I did not sign up for this, and you walked out. And that was like no 2-week notice, no, I'm going to like start looking for another job. It was like, I'm done, I can't do this anymore, and you were out of there. Like maybe you've experienced times like this. And these times, they happen all the time actually in our lives, and to be honest, it happens in our faith too. It doesn't just happen in our jobs or in our parenting relationships or anything like that. It happens in our faith, where we reach points, we reach certain situations in our life where we look around and we go, I did not sign up for this. God, this is not what I thought I was getting into when I gave my life to you, when I said I would follow. Like, this is not what I expected. And so maybe you've gone through difficult times where maybe you walked away. Maybe for a season you had a time where God led you through something difficult. Maybe it was the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job. Maybe it was a difficult diagnosis. I don't know what it was for you, but you walked through something difficult and you at least considered, or maybe you actually did, walk away because you said, I'm out. This is too much. Or maybe for you, it wasn't something you experienced, but it was something you observed. Like you were just not, maybe you didn't go through the really difficult thing, but you just looked around at the world and you saw all the pain and the suffering and the hardship that's in the world, and you went, I don't know if I can do that. Like I don't know if I can believe in a God who would allow this. Like how can God allow such terrible things to happen? And maybe you walked away from belief in God at that point. Not because of anything that you personally experienced, but just because of your observations in the world. You said, I can't believe in a God that would allow something like this, and you walked away. Or maybe you're considering walking away now. Maybe you're in that place where you're walking through something, or you're watching some of the things going on in our world, and you're like, I don't know about this. Would a loving God really, would a loving God do this? Would he allow this kind of suffering? But what's so interesting about that is when we go through difficult times and we consider walking away, when you talk to people who have these amazing stories of faith and they tell you about all the things that God has done in their life, what you will always hear from them is stories of times where they walked through difficult circumstances and didn't walk away from faith, but actually came out on the other side of it with stronger faith. And there's something in that situation, something in their relationship with God or their dependence on him through it, it strengthened them and it caused them to have a stronger faith because of what they walked through. They walked through something tough and their faith got stronger. Why is that? Why is it that there's so different reactions, that sometimes people face difficult things and it absolutely crushes their faith, and other people can walk through similar or the same things or sometimes even more difficult things, and when they come through it on the other side, they're stronger? What's the difference? Is there something that happens in those situations that works for some people and doesn't work for others? What is it that makes the difference? See, we've been going through the book of Mark, and as we look at today's passage for today, look, there's lots of different stories we could have told from Jesus' life that could be used to examine this question. What is the thing that helps you get through difficult circumstances with your faith intact or even stronger? There's lots of stories we could have looked at that would have answered that. But one of the best is actually exactly right where we're at in the book of Mark right now. We've been going through this series, we're calling it On Your Mark, and it's the Gospel of Go. We've been looking at Jesus' life and specifically how he mobilized people to tell others about him. And last week, we talked about the importance of sharing your story. And we looked at Mark chapter 5 and Jesus healing a man who had some demons in him. And then immediately afterward, telling that guy, hey, go tell your story. Just tell what God has done for you. And we talked about the impact that it can have when we're willing to do that. When we're not necessarily, when we're trained to go share some like theological treatise to people about everything that we've learned about the Bible, but when we're just willing to share the simple things that God has done in our life, God can use it for some amazing, amazing things. And so this week, we're going to be talking about what is it that makes the difference between difficult circumstances in life wrecking our faith or strengthening it. What happens? And so the passage for today, it's actually still in Mark chapter 5. It's immediately after the passage that we looked at this week. So if you've got a Bible, go ahead and open it up. We're going to be in Mark chapter 5. We're going to begin in verse 21. And the passage we're looking at today, it's not just like an account of one story, it's actually two. And it's this thing that's kind of unique to the book of Mark, that Mark, when he was writing, he would do these things that scholars call, it's a really, really like scholarly, amazing name. They would call this a Markan sandwich. And basically what this is, it's a time where Mark would begin to tell a story, and then he would interrupt himself with another story, only to come back to the first story afterwards, and you get to the end of all of it, and you realize that both stories together were kind of making the same point. And so the passage we're looking at today is one of those. The first story is interrupted by another one that later gets resolved with the same point for both of them. So here we are, Mark chapter 5, verse 21. Mark chapter 5, beginning in verse 21. This is what it says. It says, when Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, so this is like right after what we read last week, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, my little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. So Jesus went with him. So we have this guy. It tells us his name is Jairus, and he is a synagogue leader. Now, they're in a town called Capernaum. Capernaum's not a very big town. And so to be a synagogue leader in such a small town, this would have been a position of status for him. Like, this is something that people in the town would have looked up to him as being a religious leader. And so he has kind of a reputation to uphold as a synagogue leader. And the Jewish leaders were pretty skeptical of Jesus at this point. They're like, I don't know about this guy, that he's coming and he's healing people and he's teaching things that are a little bit different, and he's claiming to be the Messiah. And so there was this tension there. And so Jairus, the synagogue leader, who's supposed to have this kind of like standoffish feel towards Jesus, he comes to him. And it says that he falls at his feet. There's only two reasons in the ancient world why you would fall at somebody's feet. One would be you're trying to show them deep respect, which doesn't fit with who Jairus is, the position that he holds in the community. The other reason would be to worship that person, which definitely doesn't fit with who Jairus is and who he is in the community. But nonetheless, we see him doing just that. And the reason is, it tells you right there in the passage, his daughter is sick. Isn't it amazing how when we come up against certain difficult situations in life, that we're willing to do things that we wouldn't normally do. And we're willing to seek answers in places we wouldn't normally seek answers in. And so Jairus is desperate. And so he doesn't care about his reputation. He doesn't care what people are going to say about him. He just wants his little girl to be healed. And so he comes to Jesus, and he falls at his feet and asks him to heal him. And Jesus is like, okay, let's go. And they start going. Verse 24. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. Here's that Markan sandwich, okay? So we started this story with Jairus, and now all of a sudden there's a new person introduced, and it's this lady, and she's got a medical condition. It's a pretty serious medical condition. She's been bleeding for 12 years, and she's had all kinds of medical diagnoses and treatment that have gone on, and none of it has helped. So that tells us a couple of things. It tells us that her bleeding is probably bleeding that's coming from her womb, because that's the only thing that would explain why simple normal putting pressure on a wound or stitching it up wouldn't have worked. Like, what is going on here? And so she's got this bleeding, and this, any kind of bleeding, but this kind of bleeding in particular, would have been a big deal. That she'd gone through all this medical care with no answers, which it tells us in the passage that she's spent all of her money, so she's living in poverty. We know that she's probably a social outcast because that type of bleeding would have made her ceremonially unclean. We talked a little bit about what that means last week. It means that she wouldn't be able to worship at the temple. She wouldn't be accepted in the religious community because they would have believed that she could spread her defilement to other people. And so she would have been really, really poor, socially outcast, and of course, incredibly uncomfortable. Like living with that condition for 12 years cannot have been a pleasant experience. And so she's experiencing all of these things, and she comes to Jesus. And here's what happens in the next verse, verse 27. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. And now, this is a big deal. There was a common Jewish belief, and it was a messianic belief, that when the Messiah came, this one that was going to be sent from God, who would save the people, save the nation of Israel, and save people from their sins, that when this person came, there was a common belief that this would be a rabbi that would wear a traditional Jewish prayer shawl. And these prayer shawls have these tassels that hang off the end. And I don't really have time to go into it a whole lot, like where this tradition comes from. But the idea would have been is that if she's believing in this Messiah, that when that Messiah comes, the Jews believed that you could just touch the ends of those prayer tassels and be healed. That you didn't have to say anything, pray anything, that you could just touch them as they went by. And so for her to come up to Jesus and to touch his cloak in this manner, this is not just her like crossing her fingers and hoping something works. Like she has been a student of the Old Testament. She's been a student of the Hebrew Bible. She knows what the Scripture says about the Messiah, and she's saying, this guy's the one. And so this is for her to come and to reach out and touch the corner of his cloak is a confession of him being the Messiah. See, the faith that this woman is demonstrating is a confession that Jesus is the Messiah, and it's also one of the things that we'll talk about that helps us be able to experience difficult circumstances in life and come through it on the other side with our faith intact. It's one of the things that makes all the difference in keeping or abandoning our faith in the face of difficult circumstances. See, often the thing that makes the difference is what you believe. See, it's hard to believe that God has good things planned for us when we are walking through difficult circumstances. And it can even be hard when you're just observing, when you're watching other people go through things, or you're just seeing general things happen in the world. See, a lot of people struggle to believe in God because there's suffering in the world. But as we've already said, that doesn't explain then how some people can go through extreme suffering and come out on the other side of it with not just their faith intact, but stronger faith. And so if we know that happens, that people can go through difficult times and still come out of it on the other side with this deep-seated love for God and trust in God, then maybe for us to say that suffering means that God can't exist, maybe that's just a little bit disingenuous. Like if you've never walked through something difficult and you're just making an observation about something someone else is going through or the difficulty that you see in the world, it may be just a little bit disingenuous to use the pain and suffering of another person as reason to not believe in God when the people who are actually walking through the pain and the suffering are seeing that as a thing that strengthens their faith in God. I think if you're in that place where you're watching difficult things go on in the world and you're seeing people go through it and they're clinging to their faith throughout it, and you're looking at them going, well, I don't understand that, I would encourage you, go have a conversation with them and just ask them. Say, hey, how can you I know what you're facing in life. I know the job loss, or I know the whatever's going on. How can you cling so tightly to your faith? And just ask them to tell their story. Say, hey, how are you able to hang on to your faith in the face of this? See, in fact, the existence of pain in our world and the existence of suffering in our world, not only is it not a valid argument against the existence of God, but suffering, it does not prove, the presence of suffering in our world doesn't prove that God doesn't exist. It simply proves that a God who doesn't allow suffering doesn't exist. See, it only proves that a God who doesn't allow suffering doesn't exist. Christians don't believe in that kind of God either, to be honest. Like we don't believe in a God who is going to make everything roses and it's going to be great and we're never going to experience difficulty in life. We believe in a God who allows difficult things. Andy Stanley, a pastor in Georgia, he has a quote that I want to share with you. He says, Christians believe in a God who allowed the worst possible thing to happen to the best possible person, Jesus. See, when you remove the expectation from God that He's not going to allow you to experience too much, or He's not going to allow you to experience a certain brand of suffering, then you can be open to the possibility that God may just be doing something bigger through that suffering. That God can tell a bigger story through you and through your situation than you may be able to see when you're in the middle of it. So this woman, she may or may not have believed that Jesus had a bigger story to tell through her. We don't know. We just know that she believed He was the Messiah and that she wanted to be healed, and she believed that Jesus could do it. So she reaches out, she touches the corner of His cloak. But as we're going to see, look, when you come to Jesus for help, He is both going to ask from you and give you more than you had bargained for. It's going to cost you more than you expected, but you will also receive more than you expected. And we'll talk about that. Let's look at the next verse, verse 29. It says, immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from Him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding around you," His disciples answered, "and yet you asked, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. So this woman, she slips into the crowd like she's a social outcast. She knows any physical contact she comes into with other people is going to make them ceremonial unclean. So she is looking to get in, get her healing, get out. This is like convenience store healing she's looking for. I just want to get in, have it happen, and go. I don't want to draw attention to myself. I just want this taken care of. But Jesus does not let that happen. She comes, she touches Him, and He begins to show her that her circumstances do not define her relationship with God. He doesn't care that she's an outcast. He doesn't care that she's poor. None of that matters to Him. He's actually going to use those things to tell an even greater story through her. So Jesus, he feels power go out from Him, and He stops. And He turns the spotlight on her. He draws attention to her. And He says, "Who touched me?" And the disciples are like, "What are you talking about? Everybody touched you, Jesus. This is a big crowd crowding around Him. Everybody touched you." But see, here's the thing, is that Jesus knows, and He's showing us here, that there's a difference between those who reach out to Jesus just to be close to Him and those who come in faith. See, the difference between those people who come to church and they sit in church because they want to hear about Jesus and they like the idea of being around people that know about Jesus, is the difference between those people and the people who genuinely engage in a life of faith. That no matter what comes in life, they say, "I trust you, Jesus." And they take steps to show their continued devotion and love for God. They choose to follow His commandments in every area of life. It's not just a Sunday morning thing, but it begins to permeate every area of their life. See, proximity to God doesn't define your relationship to God. The next verse, let's look, verse 33. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at His feet, trembling with fear, and told Him the whole truth. And so when it says that she tells Him the whole truth, she's looking back at those things she has studied in the Old Testament. She's looking back at those things she knows about the Messiah that she believes, and so she tells the whole story. She tells about her history, and she tells about what she knows Jesus could do for her, and she shares that story in the middle of this big crowd. She wanted to get in and get out, and not have the attention on her, and here Jesus turns the spotlight and gives her an opportunity to share her story. And she does, and so she shares about how Jesus can heal her, but also the trust that she has that He is the Messiah. This is a terrifying moment, and she uses it to tell her story of Jesus' goodness to her. And look how Jesus responds, verse 34. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. He uses that word daughter. And it's the only time in the New Testament, it's the only time in Scripture that Jesus uses this word towards another person. It's a word that communicates deep relationship, right? Like you don't call somebody son or daughter if you don't have a deep connection with them. And so for him to use this word for her, and for even more so for it to be the only time that Jesus uses this word towards another people is a really, really big deal. And he tells her to go, be freed from your suffering. See, this conveys a deep relationship. She wanted to be healed. And it cost her much more than she expected. Things did not go the way that she thought. But she also received far more than she could have imagined. She came away with a stronger faith because of what she believed God could do, about the miraculous that he could do through her circumstances. Her relationship with God, her faith in God was strengthened instead of wrecked because of what she believed. Now, maybe you're hearing this and you're going, okay, that's great. Like, that's amazing how he does that. He heals her. But what about Jairus? Like, his daughter's on her deathbed. Like, and he's like, this would have been actually kind of rude, right? Like, Jesus has said, okay, yeah, we're going to go. I'm going to go heal your daughter. And the first person who, like, grabs a hold of him and gets his attention, he completely stops for it. And if you're Jairus, you're watching this going, like, what about me? Like, I'm glad you can heal her, but, like, I was here first. I was in line first. Like, why are we stopping? What's going on? Because the truth is that, look, Jairus came in faith too. He came to Jesus believing that Jesus could do something big through this story. Like he did, and it has cost him more than he bargained for. Look at the next verse, verse 35. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? She's dead. Like, Jesus was on his way to help, decides to stop and help somebody else, and because of this delay, she's gone. She's dead. She's the very thing that Jairus had come to Jesus for him to fix, they say that they think is no longer fixable. And so the people bringing the news, they're like, hey, this is it. This is the end of the road. No sense in bugging him anymore. I guess let's just go home and let's begin, funeral preparations and everything. But look at what Jesus says in the next verse, verse 36. Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. Don't be afraid, just believe. See, this highlights another thing that can make all the difference in how you respond to tough circumstances. Not just what you believe, but who are you going to listen to? Who are you going to listen to? Jairus is faced with a choice to listen to the people from his household who are just telling him the facts, or he can listen to Jesus. But think about how hard this must have been. Like, his daughter has passed away because Jesus has delayed, and Jesus tells him, just believe. Like, if I was Jairus, I'd have been like, hey, I'm here, aren't I? Like, I came to you. I have been believing. That's what I'm here for. And you didn't come through. And maybe you've experienced that in life, where you trusted and you said, God, I trust you to make this thing happen, or to prevent this thing from happening, or do this protection or heal or whatever it was, and you prayed and you came to Jesus and you knew that it could only happen through him, and then the thing that you asked for didn't happen, or the thing that you asked not to happen did happen, and you're left going, oh, I did my part. Like, I came to you. I did what I was supposed to. And maybe you've even been hurt by somebody who used the very words that Jesus uses here. That as you're walking through something difficult, maybe a well-intentioned person came alongside you and said, you just need to believe. Like, you just need to believe. And that had a damaging effect on you as well. You went, hey, I'm trying to. And while I keep trying to, nothing is going the way that it should. And maybe that person even went as far as to insinuate that the bad things that are going on or that are happening is somehow your fault because you haven't believed enough. That you must not have like that great of a connection with God, or maybe there's something wrong in your life that you're causing these problems. That suffering is somehow like the end of the road. It's this unfortunate road you found yourself on, and now the bad thing has happened, and welp, I guess that's it. I'm sorry. Who you listen to can make all the difference. Jesus indicates that there's going to be more to this story. Verse 37 says, he did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. See, Jesus comes in and he says, hey, they get to Jairus' house, they go in, the body's laying there, and he says, hey, she's not dead, she's asleep. Surviving difficult circumstances isn't only about what you believe or who you listen to, but it's also about how you frame your suffering. See, Jesus reframes this thing that looked like it was the end of a road, and he reframes it as something temporary. He says, she's not dead, she's just asleep. It goes on, verse 40. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. See, sometimes in order to reframe things, to get a different perspective, not only do you need to listen to the right people and believe the right things, but there may be times where you need to temporarily put some people out. You need to take away the platform that some people have to speak into your life at different times. Like maybe you're going through something incredibly difficult and somebody's in your ear and they're telling you that you just don't have enough faith, or they're telling you that God's not really there and he's not going to see you through it, or they're telling you, hey, this is your fault and everything that you're doing is contributing to this and making it terrible, and you know, like something inside of you knows that that's not right, but they're there all the time and it's beginning to make you think that way. Sometimes you need to put some people out temporarily. Jesus surrounds Jairus intentionally with people in the room who will point him forward, not those who would say, this is the end. See, there are times when you may need to do this. And it's not creating an echo chamber. It's not creating an environment where you just are looking for people who agree with you. It's not what you're trying to do. But you're leaning into the voices and leaning into the relationships that will help you reframe your suffering in light of the bigger story that God may be telling through it. And so that's what Jesus does. He kicks everybody out except for the disciples and the parents. And this is what happens next, verse 41. He took her, the little girl, he took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means little girl, I say to you, get up. The Talitha cum, that's Aramaic words. They get translated into Greek, which is where you get the little girl, I say to you, get up. And that's the English translation of the Greek translation of an Aramaic word. And so there's a little bit that gets lost in translation there. So if we could translate it directly from Aramaic into English, the best translation here is something along the lines of, honey, it's time to get up. Which is exactly what you say to a little girl who's asleep. Like that's exactly what you would say to her. And so that's what Jesus says in verse 42. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. See, for Jairus, coming to Jesus, it didn't mean that the difficult circumstances were going to come to an end. It didn't actually, that encounter with Jesus ended up costing Jairus more than he thought it would. But it also gave him more than he ever could have imagined. It gave him a story that led to bigger faith. And not just for Jairus, but for everyone who was in the house. Everyone who saw what God did through that situation. Everyone who saw what God did as Jairus was walking through probably the most painful experience of his life up to that point. See, your suffering and your response to your suffering may be the thing that leads someone else to see God at work or to see God as worthwhile. When you are able to persevere through difficult circumstances because you trust what you believe and you are listening to people who are pointing you in the right direction, you're able to reframe things in light of who God is, that can be the difference, not just for you, but for other people. See, it's possible to come through difficult times and not lose your faith in God. And sometimes those difficult circumstances are the very thing God uses to strengthen your faith. Listen, if you don't hear anything else I say today, hear this. The power of your story is not your redeemed circumstances. The power of your story is the God who is with you through them. See, Jesus didn't simply just walk into these people's lives and they're in a difficult situation and he leveraged it to point to good things. In one example with Jairus' daughter, he actually creates the painful situation. And he does it in order to show the connection between our circumstances and the growth and the development of our faith. Christian author Philip Yancey says the only thing worse than disappointment with God is disappointment without Him. How do you walk through difficult things without knowing that the creator of the universe is in your corner? How can you face those difficult things? Of course people get depressed, and of course they go through difficulty looking at this, because without God in your life, there's no hope. What God would say is a journey that you're on, and there's a story He's being told. You would view it as the end of a road. You would see it as a closed door, that it was a dead end, that this is it. This is the way it is, and there's nothing I can do. But Jesus would say, no, I'm working through this. See, when you think that God is doing something to you, you may lose your faith. But when you trust that God is doing something in you so that He can do something through you, it makes all the difference. So when you come up to those difficult times in life and you come up to those hard things and the things that make you want to say, I don't know, God, I don't know if you're there, I don't know if you're real, I don't know if you're actually loving, I don't know. When you come up to those times, pay attention to what you believe. Pay attention to who you're listening to and how you're framing what you're experiencing. It will cost you more than you expected, but you'll also receive more than you bargained for. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your goodness to us. That God, sometimes it can be hard to see. Just being honest, we go through things in life sometimes that are so difficult and so overwhelming that it's hard to see you and it's hard to trust that you're working behind the details. But God, you show us in times like this that it's not our circumstances that define our relationship with you, but it's our relationship with you that help us reframe our circumstances. It's our relationship with you that helps us to look at the things going on in the world and experience the difficulty and the pain. We're not trying to sugarcoat things and make it sound like it's so easy to get through, but God, it helps us to reframe it and to know that you are there with us, and this is something that you can use to bring people to know you. That God, you are at work in our stories, in the good and the bad, and if we can just share what you have done for us, we have no idea the impact that it can have. So God, would you help us reframe this week the difficulties that we face? There's people here in the building right now, or they're watching online, that are walking through terrible, terrible things. They're walking through sickness of themselves or a family member, or job loss, or the loss of a loved one, or difficulty relationally, or parent-child things, or so many different things are going on. And people are in situations that frankly I can't ever imagine experiencing. There's people in abusive relationships, and there are people in the room, and there are people watching who have walked through the worst kinds of violation. And God, you've been there with them every step of the way. So God, would you help us to see that? Help us to trust and to know that you are at work in our stories. God, we love you. We thank you so much for Jesus. It's in His name we pray.